welcome back to the White Coat Club. My name is Lindsay and I'm here together with Nicole, and we're both counselors at MoonPrep. Today we're going to be discussing letters of recommendation. If you haven't done so already, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more great content about direct med and college admissions. Okay, so let's first talk about our current seniors, because right now we're kind of in the midst of the college application process. So Nicole, what should current seniors expect right now?
Yeah, so this is a super exciting time. You're probably getting ready to hit submit, or you might have already submitted for some of those early deadlines. So what you should expect is once you send in your applications, once you press submit, your letters of recommendation should get sent to the universities that you've applied to pretty promptly after the fact. So you should expect the colleges to receive those pretty shortly. Couple of things that you'll notice, and I'll kind of explain each one as we go. As soon as you hit apply and you finally apply to the school after you've, clicked all of the buttons, you'll get an email from them pretty much 24 to 48 hours later. It's almost as if you've ordered something on Amazon where they email you saying thank you for your order. It's kind of like, thank you for your application. We've received it. And then they send you an email of what you can expect from them. With that email is going to be a portal to log in to their website. So now let's, use Penn State as an example. If you've just pressed submit, you're essentially done with the Common App website for that school. And then all of your updates and things will then come via their own college's portal. So what you'd expect is when you log in, you'll be able to see kind of a checklist that they've received your application, if they've received your letters of recommendation, they've received your transcripts, all of those types of things. So kind of the next thing in getting into how do they get sent there is usually the follow-up question to that. So it depends on your school, your high school specifically. A lot of schools will use Naviance or Scoir or something similar, essentially one of those mailboxes for sending electronic documents. So if you're using Common App and your school uses Naviance and they are linked, once you hit submit on Common App, you don't really have to do much else. It'll automatically flag an email and a notification to your school counselor, and then they will send your documents over on behalf of you. Other options, if you're using Scoir or if you're not using Naviance, and Common App, if you're using Coalition, kind of all of there's numerous different routes that could be happening with these. The most important thing is knowing what your high school does, knowing their process, following their procedures in order for your letters and your other documents to get sent.
I think that's the biggest thing. Ultimately is check with your guidance counselor, like your school counselor, before doing anything, just to make sure you're following protocol. And even when you're like asking for the letters, now we'll jump into like underclassmen too. That'll vary from school to school, like when to ask, how to ask, how many teachers you're allowed to ask. So every school is going to be different. And so kind of keep that in mind whenever you're going about this process. But I guess in general, like too, most schools want to see like 2 teacher letters of recommendation. Who those teachers can be can kind of vary. For a lot of our BSMD students, usually we want at least like 1 from like a STEM class. Of course, you're applying to a heavy like STEM future. And so you want to make sure that you do showcase like that ability in STEM. And so that would probably be one of those ones that you would ask for. And then additionally, like maybe like a humanities teacher. And so those are going to be like your 2 teachers. And then your outside letters too will not also be an option. And this will be like where I think it is more consistent with everyone, because you'll always will request that through the Common App. That's right, Nicole? I always get slightly confused whenever Naviance gets added in there, but you always will ask it via the Common App, no matter what your school uses, right?
Not necessarily.
Ooh,
No.
yep,
Yeah.
it's confusing. It's so confusing.
Not necessarily. Because if you're using Naviance and you're using Common App, then you won't have to. If your school's using Scoir even too, and you're using Common App, you would just request it through Scoir. You don't have to request it through Common App. But every high school is going to have a different answer to that question. So they probably gave you a little bit of a like assembly at the end of the school year of 11th grade. They'll probably have another one, or they may have had one early in 12th grade. If you're not sure, definitely just find out, there should be like a document that they give you on step by step by step.
And if they didn't ask,
Yeah, please
very
ask.
simple. Yeah. Please
Yeah.
ask before you do anything, just because it can mess up the system. So always ask.
And they have their
Um,
system that's worked for them, like
mhm.
for school. I've worked at numerous schools. We've all had completely different ways of doing it. So they know it like the back of their hand. So just make sure you find out what that is and just follow their directions. If you have friends at other schools or doing other things, don't just take their advice.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, And to that end too, like I guess like whenever you have submitted to like let's just use the example of like Penn State, your school doesn't use like Naviance or School Links or Score or anything like that. So you're just submitting through the Common App and honestly through any of those other sites though as well, platforms. You just have to, the teachers just have to submit it one time. They don't have to submit it for each school every single time. So as you're going along, just make sure that you're not sending it. I don't even know if you can send it a million times, but it only has to be sent in there once and then you can reassign it to every school you want to.
Exactly.
Now, one thing that students always ask me about is like the waiving their rights to see the letter. Um,
Mm.
in short, they should students should waive their rights to see the letters. That
Yeah,
means that that you're saying, I don't want to see the letter. I'm certifying that like everything here is I'm not going to look at it. I haven't seen it. And of course, some teachers like might send it to you beforehand, and that's okay. But if you waive your rights, it kind of keeps the integrity of the letters too, if that makes sense, because the teacher knows that you can't see it, and so that they are, going to tell the truth essentially. And so that's why it is important to waive your rights. It just like adds a little bit more authenticity to those letters.
yeah. And some teachers won't. I've seen say, "I'm not writing your letter if you don't waive the right for me to see it."
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And teachers are not going to be malicious. I mean, a lot of students will then be like nervous about what if they were saying bad about me.
Hmm.
They're not going to write anything malicious, like for the most part. I can never guarantee it. But um, so don't worry. I've also had
Yeah.
a lot of teachers that I know who have said, I'm probably not the best person to write your letter. You should look elsewhere. Um,
Hmm.
they don't feel like they're going to write one that's going to benefit you.
Exactly. Because like whenever you ask them to write you a letter of recommendation, like they're quite literally recommending you. And if they don't feel comfortable, either they'll say exactly what Nicole says, or maybe they'll lie and be like, oh, I'm already like, overcommitted myself to writing letters of recommendation. So if they're agreed, that means that they'll do hopefully a good job about it and, write you a personalized, in-depth kind of letter of recommendation.
Exactly. Yeah. And then I know we get a lot of questions about outside letters too. Some schools will allow outside letters of recommendation. Some will not. The best way, I think, to find out what that school allows is just searching them up on the Common App. They'll tell you right there on their information page. If you scroll down kind of almost to the bottom, it'll tell you how many they require and then how many they allow. Um, and then now this is going to be separate. So regardless of what your high school's policy is about requesting letters of recommendation, if you're requesting outside letters and the school is allowing outside letters, you would do that straight through the Common App. Or another way that you sometimes can do it as well is through the college's portal.
Hmm. And that's going to be especially true for like BSMD is like it is like just a little bit all over the place. There's a lot of different rules, kind of like what you're talking about with schools. BSMD programs are going to be kind of similar with that, where they have different ways of sending in letters of recommendation. Sometimes it's through portal, sometimes it's through Common App. So follow the rules, follow the instructions. Because especially for BSMD programs, they are a lot of the times really strict about like when things need to be sent. Like I feel like a lot of times for traditional like undergrad schools, like let's just say like a Duke or a UPenn or NYU, sometimes they'll have some like leeway when it comes to letters of recommendation being sent in. Like they might allow them everything to be sent in like within a week of the application or 2 weeks of the application or something like that. It might vary from place to place. But some BSMD programs are really strict about things. Um, like University of Alabama at Birmingham or Virginia Commonwealth, they all require the letters to be like received by the deadline day. And so, making sure that you're kind of being cautious about deadlines and getting your application material in time is key. UAB and VCU are both kind of tricky with how they do the letter writing because the letter requests are set through like the BSMD specific application because you'll submit a undergrad application through like the Common App or whatever portal you use, and then you'll have to fill out that like BSMD specific um, application as well. And on that BSMD application, that's where you'll submit your letter of recommendation request. But the requests don't get sent out until you submit your application. And so if you were to apply, like, if the deadline's November 1st, you apply at like, November 1st at 8 a.m., you're kind of setting yourself up for failure because you're only giving your letter writers for like VCU, for example, like, what is that? 14, 16 hours to submit their letters. What if it's like on a Saturday and they're not on their email? What if it's like a Monday and they are on their email, but they don't check it that day? So, that you want to make sure that you give them enough time to do those types of things and not set yourself up for failure because you've put in so much hard work that you want to make sure that you do everything in your power to get those letters in on time because there's only so much you can do, but you just have to make sure you give them the time to do so.
Yeah, I feel like starting to instill the verbiage of like that's the very last day you can submit it versus like, oh, that's just the due date. That's the day it's due.
Hmm.
We
Yeah.
should be applying earlier than the very last day that it's due.
Yes, you want to give them some like time. I always like say like 3 to 4 business days. So if you submit like on a Friday at 5, but the application is due like, Sunday, you'd be like, oh, I gave them 2 days to do it. Not really, because that's a weekend. They might not be on their emails. Like if it's especially a teacher, they probably aren't checking their email like on Saturday or Sunday, nor should they be expected to. So make sure that you have your act together essentially and can give yourself the best chance of getting accepted.
And kind of backtracking to the letters of recommendation from the teachers. Now, if you and this is kind of for all grades listening, you should be asking your teachers for letters pretty much in the spring, late spring of 11th grade. Now, let's pretend that your teacher is super on it and they just had you that year and they say, I'm going to write your letter right now. They can write your letter in June of junior year and send it to your counselor, and it's already uploaded in your portal for Naviance or Scoir. So when you submit, it's just your school counselor that has to see it and then push it through to the college. The teachers don't necessarily have to see it if their letters are already uploaded. So what you could do if you're a current senior and you're trying to figure out, like I asked them a while ago, I don't know if it's in or not, check with your school counselor to see if it's already uploaded into your portal or not, into your Naviance or Scoir portal.
So I think the
Um,
main takeaway so far is communication is key. Communication is always key, no matter what it is, if it's your letter writers with your school counselor, with your moon prep counselor, like your independent college counselor, communication really helps this process go a lot easier.
Exactly. Because then I've had sometimes students will say, I applied to this school. Did you send me letters of rec? And as a school counselor, I'm saying I didn't receive any letters of rec. Who was supposed to write them? They never sent them to me. So again, continuously making sure you're communicating is
Hmm.
the most important thing.
Cool. Anything else we want to say about like our current seniors and like the process?
Um, I don't think so. Just
Like I said,
follow up, communicate.
that's exactly what I was going to say. Follow up, check your portals, make sure everything got sent in time is key. So yeah, for underclassmen, let's talk a little bit about when to ask. I know you kind of already mentioned this. Junior year, end of junior year, I think is always the best time to ask before you go home for summer break, kind of identifying who you're going to ask. I've had some schools who, will only allow teachers to write a certain number of letters, or the teachers themselves kind of put restrictions on that they're only going to do it for like 15 kids because it is a lot of work for them to do these types of things. And so making sure that if you do have one teacher that you really want to ask, you get in there early. So asking like before you go home for summer and then following up with them again in August because, potentially they didn't do it over the summer because they're on break too. They might not be allowed to do those types of things during the summer or want to do those things in the summer and be doing it when they come back in the fall. And so just following up with them again in the fall, I think is always a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. When you get back to school, just make sure that they have written it or are still going to write it, or maybe it's already
Mhm.
uploaded. Yeah.
And now when they're asking, we kind of already talked about this too, but for BSMD, I always think a STEM and then potentially a humanities is the best move. Now, these are kind of like general guidelines, and every student is going to be different because, like, let's say you just didn't have like a great relationship with like a STEM teacher, or like it just isn't working out. It does not mean that it's going to be like an absolute deal breaker that you're not going to get into BSMD because you don't have like a good biology letter of recommendation. Maybe the teacher like went on maternity leave, so you can't ask them, or I've had, schools where their teachers quit, or, maybe they just didn't have like a strong relationship with them, so don't think it's going to be a strong letter writer. It's better to ask for someone who you think is going to write you the best letter than a certain subject. And so whenever I say like the best letter, it doesn't mean you got an A in the class. It kind of means that you showcase like, potentially good qualities. If it's like, leadership qualities through like leading a group project, or, you came into class and had a lot of questions about a certain thing, taking that knowledge further. So you want to really think about who you can ask to give those strong letters of recommendation, not necessarily just like who you got an A in the classroom. But yeah, two teachers, decide who you think is going to be the strongest.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. It doesn't need to be specifically a certain teacher, a certain subject, but it should be a core teacher. I don't know if we would want to have two electives potentially, especially if you're doing PSMD, but
Yeah, correct. And some BSMD programs do have requirements. Like sometimes they do say like it has to be from a STEM, or it has to be from, XYZ person. It needs to be core. Um, I usually do tell kids have two core teachers that you've asked, and then, maybe have, if you think like the elective person is going to like write you like maybe the strongest letter, that can be like your third one. And if they require two cores, you maybe don't use it, but if they're pretty loose with their requirements, then the core teacher could be a perfect one to ask for. Or sorry, the elective could be the perfect one to ask for. And so those types of things could be something that you kind of plan when you're making your college list in your junior year as well.
I've also had questions about, can a coach write your letter? Now, if your coach was also your teacher, then yes. But a coach would technically not be a teacher, even if they are a teacher at your school. They would be under like an outside recommender or like
Hmm.
additional. Um, Another question I get a lot is like, well, what if they taught me at dual enrollment, like they were a college professor? That would not count as one of your two teachers. Um, if the requirement is two teachers, which most schools it is. And then if they've moved. Now, if they taught you, in 11th grade and then they switch schools and they no longer work at your school, that would still be fine. They just would have needed to have taught you at your school.
And ideally, I don't think we mentioned this. We do want it to be like a junior year teacher. I've had some people who ask about like a freshman year teacher or a sophomore year teacher. Just too much time has kind of passed before you apply, because they might have written you really great letters for a summer program that you got accepted to. So you're like, oh, I can just keep using them. But a lot of time has passed. A lot of growth hopefully has happened since then too. So asking a more recent teacher is always kind of the move, I think. Now, who do you recommend students ask for like outside letter of recommendations? Like, do you think there's like it has to be a doctor, or any recommendations for students there?
I don't think it has to be. I mean, I also feel like a lot of the ones that I've seen from doctors is like very generic.
Hmm.
If they have the time for it. And I also don't know if they really know what the schools are looking for. It's kind of more
Hmm.
like, yeah, they shouted with me. Um, if you do have like a true mentor, then yes, I think that that could be beneficial. I mean, coaches, club advisors are also like really good. They're seeing you more frequently and they're seeing you more like
Hmm.
longevity thing. If you shadowed a doctor for 2 weeks, I would not really think that that would be a beneficial letter. They've known you for 2 weeks.
Hmm.
Okay, they're going to speak to what you did and your professionalism and maybe your punctuality and things like that, but it's maybe not anything that the other people won't be able to write to as well. So if you're thinking about a
Hmm.
additional letter, you're wanting to think about who can write something about me that these two teachers will not have written. If the teachers are going to be writing, you're punctual to class, you're on time for your deadlines, and you're helpful. If maybe you're not a leader in the classroom as much as you are, on the lacrosse field, then I would see if your coach could write you a letter. Like if you've been captain for 4 years straight and you have leadership qualities there, then that would be a great outside letter. But I don't think that you need something from the people that you're shadowing.
think what you just said there too is like so key for kids to remember. It's like what's going to be different in this letter versus that letter. Um, and that should be your like mentality when you're considering who to ask for a letter writer. It's like, okay, would my um, Spanish teacher versus like my biology teacher have something different to say about me? Most likely, yes. So like that could be like a good option. But just because the schools will allow you to submit like 3 or 4 teacher letters of recommendation doesn't mean you should if you feel like they're going to be saying like the same thing. Um,
Mhm.
so I think that there is definitely like too many letters can be the problem for some kids because there's a lot of like optional letters that can be sent in, but more isn't always better in my opinion, just because we do want to see diversity. We want to see like different maybe skills that you're showcasing, like Nicole was talking about, if it's like leadership or teamwork or commitment to research or whatever it might be. Um, so thinking about those whenever you are asking for letters and also sending in the letters too, is I think key. So letter
It's a
or
to learn about you. It shouldn't be like a bragging point for them to really throw in their face. Well, look, I've shadowed all these doctors, so they should all write,
Mhm.
you know. You should just be speaking to those activities in your writing versus like, well, if I got a letter now, they'll really know that I did this.
Yeah. And to that end too, it's like, just because the a professor at Brown that you did research with writes you a letter of recommendation, that does not mean that your chances at Brown are going to be higher, especially if the letter is kind of like lukewarm. Um, so if you do have like a good relationship with the Brown professor, absolutely ask them, especially if they can speak to if it was the research that you did with them or, something else that they can really showcase some other skill. But if you think that asking from a particular university or more prestigious university is going to help you, it's definitely not the case. Nicole, do you have any advice for schools that only will let you submit like 2 letters, but you have like 4 really great ones? Like how do you try and prioritize those?
Yeah. So, the way that I would prioritize them as a student in terms of deciding would be stick to that STEM teacher and then stick to that teacher where you just have a great rapport with and they'll write you a great letter. Kind of stick to the basics there, your top two. And then the way to inform your teacher or I'm sorry, school counselor, you have 6 letters for me, but, you know, Chapel Hill only accepts 2. How do I know that those 2 are the ones that you're going to send? There's a way for you to indicate and prefer them in Naviance and Scoir. So just make sure you know how to do that and make sure that that's what your school wants you to do. Some places, some schools will have you fill out a form, but just make sure you know what your school's process is.
hmm I mean, the good news is it's, pretty fairly early in the school year. You have like a whole year to be, or most of a year really, to be forming these relationships with your junior year teachers, already starting to plan those types of things. And so as we kind of mentioned before, we want to ask like near the end of their junior year. Personally, I think it's best to like ask in person first at the end of the school year and then, send them an email follow-up with like, thank you so much for agreeing to write me a letter. Here's some more information, maybe telling them what kind of schools you're applying to so they can maybe not mention those types of things, but know the caliber of schools. Because if you're applying to a lot of IVs or BSMD programs, um, that will also like let them know just what your goals are. Additionally, then you can also let them know when your first deadlines are going to be. Because for BSMD programs, they are super early. It could be as early as mid-October. And so that's maybe a full 2 weeks before they were expecting to have the letters done for if like a traditional student was applying like early decision or things like that. And so just like letting them know the deadlines too, I think are key. And then the last thing that I tell kids to include with like the email follow-up is potentially like some stories that they might want the teacher to include. They don't, of course, the teacher doesn't have to, but it's just like some options. Like maybe some like school specific, class specific stories of a time that they did really great, leading a group project or, helping out a classmate with an issue that they had or whatever it might be. Because it's hard. Teachers have what, 180 kids or something like that throughout the school year. They're not going to remember everything. And so having maybe some core stories that you might want them to include can help make it be a more personalized letter and hopefully a better letter overall.
Yeah. I think students just assume teachers remember every single thing, but like you said, they have tons of students every year, tons of responsibilities, other things going on, please remind them. Even your school counselor too. A lot of people worry about the school counselor letter. They're like, worried I don't have to
Hmm.
report with them. I don't really talk to them that much. I see them twice a year, which is kind of the standard, but they do have to write you a letter. It's a requirement. So if you are able to just like pass them a copy of your activity list or your resume, you will get a much more personalized letter.
Hmm. Yeah, anything you can do to help, I think is always important.
Definitely.
Anything else about underclassmen?
No, I think maybe the main takeaway would just be start early
Yeah, communicate and start early. That's, I think, our advice for like just about everything.
and just be mindful again too.
Hmm.
A lot of times students will say to me, I emailed my teachers on the last day of school and asked if they could write my letters. Well, they're probably not looking at it and they might not see it. And then you're not going to hear back from them until you go back to school. So,
Hmm.
and I know some states, start school very early versus the application deadlines, but some states don't. So just be mindful. Or, they were telling me, I emailed them again like mid-July. They're probably not looking at their emails. It's the summer. So again, just be mindful of that.
Yeah, I think like one big takeaway that high school students should remember is like a lack of planning on like your part does not mean that it's an emergency for this letter writer. Like if you submit late, like right on the deadline, um, you should not be expecting them to be responding to like an urgent email at like 11 p.m. at night because you didn't plan properly. So as you're going along through this process, like ultimately, this is your responsibility to follow up with the letter writers to make sure they have all the information that they need, that you're submitting the request properly and in a timely manner. Um, and making sure to stay on top of things, checking in the portals to see when application material has been received, and remembering to thank these people too for taking the time to write you a letter of recommendation as well.
Yeah.
Maybe for BSMD programs or having to submit it like multiple times, it is a lot to do, um, a lot to keep up on, and plus like a letter takes them time that they probably didn't get paid for to do. So send them a thank you letter, to showcase your appreciation for them as well.
Yeah. And the other thing with um, your lack of planning is not an emergency. I've mentioned I've worked as a high school guidance counselor for years. And the first week of school is chaos. There's schedule changes, there's new students that have to be put into the schedule, tons of things happening. And so many times year after year, there's students that come in the first day. I have an emergency. I need to know what to do my letters of recommendation. And it's not quite an emergency at that moment, and they're often told like I can't help you with that right this second, you have to wait, send me an email and I can get back to you, but I just don't have the time to commit to that in the moment. So have some patience, have some grace, be appreciative.
Yeah. You're not their number one priority, but you definitely are a priority for them because they'll be writing it, but just need some time. So, um, you know, making sure to be respectful in your requests and things along those lines, I think are really key.
Yeah.
All right, so I think that's it for us on letters of recommendation. Hopefully this helps, but if you only take away two things, ask early and communicate is really the big thing. Planning on your part and communicating really does help this whole process go a lot easier. But until next time, we will be coming at you in about 2 weeks with some more content about direct med and college admissions. Let us know in the comments if you have on like YouTube or on like on our website if you have any questions or other things that you want us to cover. But we will be seeing you in 2 weeks. Thanks so much. Bye.